I play a lot of instruments. You can see some behind me here. I like to have them in every color. I can at least play bad romance on all the ones I have. I also like to dance, partner dancing, like swing dancing. You see me in the bottom there. I like to teach. You'll hear my speech patterns are probably teacherly, and I'll assign homework like a teacher. This is me at the top teaching an intro to web development class at Yale University, probably 10 years ago now, a long time ago. And then I taught Electron a couple years ago down the bottom. I've been in tech 10 years, most recently for the government, USCIS, as a product manager. Before that, I was a front-end engineer doing Ember at Heroku. I love Ember. I've done a lot of roles. I've worked in a lot of sectors, like a lot of tech people. Lately, I do freelance work, talks like this, workshops, embedded trainings with companies, and coaching 101. A long time ago, I did neuroscience research at Yale University, and I'm co-author on a few papers. Here's an example of one using a lot of words. It won't make sense to you if you're not in the neuroscience field. I'm not going to explain this today because it's not our topic. I'm just showing you what I used to do. All right, what are we talking about tonight? There's two parts, a smaller intro, what needs debugging, like what are some scenarios where this is ever useful, and then we'll go through how to debug using a whole bunch of concrete techniques back in psychology research. All right, what even needs debugging in our brains? Sometimes you might experience a downward spiral of negative thoughts and negative emotions, where you have negative thoughts that lead to more negative feelings, that lead to negative thoughts. And I'll give you some examples. I want to comment, I made that in Blender. I'm very proud, the 3D modeling program. All right, sometimes you find yourself ruminating on a bad situation where you just keep thinking about the negatives, the causes and the consequences, instead of the more productive thing, thinking about the solutions and what you can actually do now that you're in this bad situation. Everybody has these. Everybody has downward spiral sometimes and ruminate sometimes. It's natural for people, but it's not the best. And if you can recover from them, you can often be more productive and happy. All right, I'll give you some concrete examples. One, an argument at work. Imagine you have an idea to solve a problem and the coworker has a different idea. They don't agree with you. If things get heated, you might end up arguing, and you might feel bad about it and stew and simmer and think about it a lot. You might wonder if you're a good employee or a good coworker or a nice person or too nice of a person or any of those possibilities. If you're a parent, you might find yourself snapping at the kids sometimes. Kids can be annoying. And then you might feel bad about it. Maybe you wonder if you're a good parent or not sometimes. I think most parents go through that at some point. All right, for a third example, once I was headed to a Meetup event. I was hangry and wet and late and I stepped in the puddle and I thought everything sucks. Then I recovered, and I'll tell you that story in more detail later in the talk. Now I'd like to take a minute. I want you to think about what kinds of challenging experiences you have been through in the past month that you'll use to think about all the techniques that we're talking about today. So I'll set a timer for a few minutes. Actually, just think of 3. You don't have to come up with 5. When you're done and you have them, you can write them in the chat sidebar. Or if they're private and you want to keep them to yourself, you can. If you're on the fence, I'd like to see it. It helps guide the discussion here. Any questions on this prompt? All right, great. I'll set the timer. I'll do 4 minutes for this.
We're not trying to trigger a downward spiral for anybody, right?
No. If you do feel some negative feelings, hopefully we'll recover that by the end.
Okay.
Once you know the techniques.
That's good. Oh, we're supposed to come up with 5? Is that
three,
each?
3 is fine.
Oh, okay.
Even 1 is fine, really, but I want you to have a few.
Oh, okay. I was like, I came up with 1. I'm done.
All right, it's time. Please share what you have. We'll also talk about these prompts. You can choose whatever you want to talk about in the breakout sessions, and this is a good set to pull from. Now you've brainstormed these. All right. Another thing I want to call out before I jump into more content is a lot of the concepts that I cover in this are available in some handouts on my website. These are Google Docs you can make a copy of or download or print. Well, some just have high-level bullets on the left. The one in the middle is a worksheet to go through a particular problem, like the ones you just wrote down. And the one on the right is a longer homework list of stuff you might want to read in addition or practice. So those are resources, and I've already put them in the Slack channel and the Meetup group in a comment. So you have access to them for sure. You don't have to worry about it. All right, so we all have these kinds of problems that we've been discussing in the side. How can we help people more effectively deal with their problems? It's a learnable skill. You can be good at it if you get good at the skill. You can also be lucky or unlucky and just get a lot of problems or a certain disposition, that's true. But the skills are what I want to focus on. You can learn those. All right, so how do we normally help people with this kind of thing? One, which comes to mind, is therapy. Therapy is great if you have access to it and you go to it and you're open to it. You can learn so much from a therapist. They're like a personal trainer for your brain, a brain trainer. There are a lot of barriers to getting therapy though, so that's not necessarily the end all. But if you get it, I'm gonna try to give you some of the resources that people do learn in therapy without you having to go to therapy yourself. That's a lot of what the content in the talk is inspired by talk therapies. There are 2 talk therapies I'm pulling ideas from in particular. One is cognitive behavioral therapy, and the other is dialectical behavioral therapy, 2 of the most common ones. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is used to treat so many mental illnesses. The list is enormous. It's almost more interesting to list what it doesn't help with, because it's just so generally useful for everybody, including people who don't have mental illness. For an example, for treating depression, CBT is as effective as antidepressant drugs. So like if you had a group with one, a group with the other one, they have similar levels of numbers of people who have a positive outcome. But the trick is that this is permanent. You learn these skills and you have them in your mind forever. The antidepressant drugs you have to take often. So in a lot of ways, it's a more long-term sustainable measure. I'm not suggesting what you do or don't do yourself. That's with you and a therapist if you have one. But I'm just trying to say CBT is very powerful, super powerful. The word therapy can be a turnoff for a lot of people. So I like to reframe the skills in CBT as training, cognitive behavioral training. That's what you're learning tonight, a lot of these. The second one I pull ideas from is dialectical behavioral therapy, which also helps with a ton. In particular, the 6 levels of validation, how to make a friend feel heard and understood, or how to make yourself feel understood. This is a beautiful framework that comes from DBT that we'll dive into later. Right, if you could go to therapy, that would be great. You'd learn a lot, but there are a lot of barriers to it. One is stigma. A lot of people aren't into mental health. Another one is financial barriers. You may or may not have insurance, which may or may not cover it. And the place that you want to go to may or may not cover it. It can be hard to find a good match therapist. So that's not to say not try. Like if you think this is valuable, you should totally try and try to get over the barriers, but there are a lot. And so there's good reason why people would want to find alternatives to going to traditional therapy. And there are a couple options like that, actually. Other than therapy, what can we do? How can we learn these skills that are useful? Some books exist, like this one called Feeling Good by David Burns, which described the techniques and skills you'd learn in therapy in a book form. And they give you a lot of examples, and they give you the framework that the therapist would be teaching and working with. Feeling Good is the one that popularized cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's great, a ton of examples. The only drawback to that book is it's long, and a lot of people I know who say it's good don't quite finish it. They don't get through a lot of it because it's just a very dense book. But if you're motivated to get through a dense book, this is great. You can learn a ton from it. I wrote a book, which is partly why you're here probably, it's to hear about the contents of it. I tried to take the big CBT book and make it much, much shorter. I condensed everything into just 90 pages so that my friends who can't get through the big book can actually finish this thing and learn the skills, be exposed to them. I'm proud, it's pretty small. I also recorded the audiobook version, which was super fun and made me a much better public speaker. I had to slow down my speaking so much when I had to struggle and listen to my own voice over and over. It really got to me. Christina, I love the emojis. Feel free to emoji me. It's encouraging. I'm also working on a board game. I'm trying to turn the book into a board game where you progress your stressful experience through stages, left to right across the board. And you use the skills on the purple part at the top, which are in those 4 categories to progress them. And you're like rolling dice with friends and talking about your problems with friends. People seem to really like it. I'm maybe going to do a Kickstarter or something to get it actually printed, hopefully this year. Anyway, in this talk, I'm going to try to tell you as much as I can as possible, all the contents of the book, give you the overview of all the techniques that are helpful, and give you time to practice them so you can really internalize the techniques. I have a lot more content than I can do in an hour, so I'm going to pick and choose from this presentation what we do cover. I'm going to try to do the best I can, teach you as much as I can. All right, the techniques are in these 5 sections. Generally, you'll use them in order, not strictly, but just so that it's memorable. This is the order. First, you have to get into an introspective state to start debugging, like a debugger breakpoint. Then you identify the inputs, process the experience, like articulate it, put it into words, and then make sure it's correct, validate it with a friend or with yourself. And then you might want to refactor the code using cognitive restructuring if there are any code smells in your thinking patterns. All right, we'll go through these one at a time. By the way, this also maps pretty well to the board game. The stages going through left to right, kind of the 5 sections of the talk too. Section 1, introspection. How do you hit that debugger breakpoint? First, I want to give you a model of the brain in a systems thinking kind of way. We're going to model it like computer programmers like to do. This is the most prototypical model shape, the IPO model, input, process, output. It has these 3 stages. You might recognize it looks a little bit like a function. Functions have an input, arguments, and it has a return value. And there's something that goes on in the middle to process the stuff. And then often there's a feedback loop. Something else happens in the code base or the user interacts with something and then the function gets hit again. We can use the same simple model for the mind. In fact, one of the classic psychology experiments that gets brought up in all the 101 classes is Pavlov and training the dogs to expect food when a bell is rung. So when Pavlov would ring the bell, the dog would salivate, and he would measure how many milliliters of saliva the dog salivated. Eventually, the dog associated the bell with food so strongly that he could even not have food present, no food at all, and ring the bell. And the dog would literally still salivate. And that's a type of science that I don't want to jump into too far. But anyway, this is an example of the input and the output. And we can model an animal using this. We like to think humans have that part in the middle, the thought part. So we're never just input-output machines. Oh no, we think all the time. But that's not quite true. Often we are on autopilot, and we are kind of just input-output machines responding to our environment because our habits are running things. Our conscious minds aren't changing how we respond to the environment when we're on autopilot. But we can flip to manual and be in a mindful state and control our responses. And that's the power of consciousness. All right, so our goal is, how do we flip from autopilot to mindful when it's useful and helpful for us to do so? I'm going to explain Whoop. This is a technique that I came up with my mom. So let me tell you a story and I'll introduce Whoop to you. My mom was having a problem. My little brother had not shut the front door again, and she got really upset and yelled at him. Well, how could you leave the door open? You're letting all the heat out. Rah, 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 rah. But she didn't want to yell at him, and she would talk to us about that before. Like when sometimes I'm snapping and I don't know why. Sorry, kids. So we went, whoop! We made a loud sound that startled her out of yelling at my brother, and she was like, yes, yes, you're right. And she stopped it, thought about it for a moment, and she realized, she entered the whoop state and thought about it, and she realized she hadn't eaten yet that day. She'd been on rushing around, doing all the busy mom stuff she had to get done that she hadn't eaten, and that's why she was yelling, not really because of the action my brother did. He was probably outside for a very good reason, leaving the door open for just a moment, whatever, doesn't matter. But she stopped and became introspective when she had this prompt, when my brother and I went, whoop. By the way, we had her permission to do this because she was working on becoming introspective when needed. I don't recommend you just do this to everybody you know. But you can do this to yourself as much as you're willing. If you dare do the whoop out loud, it will shift gears. You will become more mindful because it's just such a surprising. Yeah, there is a whoop technique. But this whoop, I think, the one with my mom, I imagine comes from whoop your behind, from like Southern phrases. It's like a whoop to your consciousness. All right, the autopilot to manual is the flip that we want to do. We want to go from the one to the other. And the prompt that is the whoop helps you remember to do so in the moment. Whenever you get into the mindful state where you're debugging, I want you to celebrate that. That's a big step forward, even if you don't know what to do next, which can feel frustrating. It's great that you managed to realize it's a moment you could introspect. Alternatively, if you have a stressful situation, you think about it later, that could be a good time to think about it like outside of context, but you still need some way to prompt yourself to become mindful and think about it. All right, we'll skip that one. That's introspection. So let's imagine you're really good at knowing when you should be mindful, whether or not you know what to do when you're in there. That's where we are. Fast forward. Or for a given challenging experience like the one you wrote down, you whooped yourself and now you're thinking about it. What do you do next? I like to start at the inputs. Identify what the inputs are. To give you a story and a mnemonic for this, I want to explain the inner versus outer brain dichotomy in the brain. This GIF has a cat turning around, seeing a cucumber and jumping. There's a fast jump reaction. The cat's afraid of the cucumber. It might be a threat. And then I like to imagine the cat went back to investigate and realized it's just a vegetable, not a big threat. There's a faster part of the brain, the faster system, often called like type 1, type 2 in some vocabulary, and there's a slower part. Often the faster part is in the limbic system. A lot of the activity goes on there, and the slower part goes on in the cortex, the outside, the wrinkly part of the brain. In general, the fast parts are the feelings and the slower parts are the thoughts. Often you have a feeling first, and then you might have thoughts to explain it afterwards. That's a useful order to remember. So if you're having thoughts and feelings, wondering which one's first, it's often the feelings. Although we know like they can cause each other too. just a different scale of magnitude. All right, fast brain and slow brain. By the way, that's also covered in Thinking Fast and Slow, a book by Daniel Kahneman, which people find very interesting. Has a lot more examples of that than what I just showed. All right, the 4 inputs to the brain. This is a breakdown that I came up with to help me keep track of what types of inputs to look for. There are 4 here that are inputs and 2 that are not, that are really your responses to the inputs. You are in control of only those 2. You're not really in control of the 4. They just happen to you. They happen to your conscious mind. So what are they? 2 of them are thoughts and feelings, automatic thoughts and automatic feelings. You didn't choose to think that thought or feel that feeling. It just happened to you. But you can choose your response to those once you're in that mindful state. You can choose to think thoughts deliberately, and you can influence your feelings some amount. So if you think thoughts deliberately, that could change your feelings more slowly, but they can. And that's within your influence too, influence feelings. All right, so what are the other 2 inputs? Thoughts and feelings sound like everything. There's also stuff that happens outside of your mind, the stuff that's happening around you, the actual world events that might be causing you to stress over things, or things that happen to you at work, etc. The 4th category is stuff inside you that aren't thoughts and feelings, like your bodily state. When my mom was hangry, that was one of her inputs that she didn't realize right away. Hangry here is a portmanteau, a combination of 2 words, hunger and anger put together. I love that word. I think it's so useful. Yeah, Craig says automatic thoughts and feelings are also where unconscious bias comes from. Totally. Although sometimes you're biased in your deliberate thoughts and don't realize it either. Sometimes there are the cognitive distortions, which we'll cover later, are a type of bias. All right, so those are 4 inputs. So when you're in the introspective state, you've gone whoop. You're wondering, all right, how did I get to this stressful state? What was I thinking and feeling, and what happened to me, and what's my bodily state? You can take inventory. What are the inputs to the function that is my consciousness? Another tool to help you with identifying the inputs is mindfulness meditation. In particular, this helps you focus on your inputs as data in a non-judgmental way. So when you just are observing those, you don't end up spiraling because you observe them and you're maybe judging your own thoughts, and automatic feelings. You feel worse and worse and worse. Meditation as a practice helps you be comfortable with those as inputs. And some doctors actually prescribe mindfulness meditation to patients. It's like not just a whole bunch of hand wavy, like humming or anything like that. There's concrete evidence that being mindful in this way helps your mental state. Another activity we'll skip because the ones at the end are the best, honestly. All right, we talked about how to get into the whoop state, what the 4 categories of inputs are. Next, we'll talk about ways to process experiences. But I want to stop for a moment. I feel like I've been talking a lot, and I want to give a moment for questions. What questions or feedback do you have? Feel free to comment, chat in the sidebar if you have any, or if you want to unmute, if you're that brave, feel free.
Are you thinking like the idea is like to practice taking those moments to stop and like process how you're feeling? That's what you're, but it's like the method is to practice stopping and like evaluate where those things are coming from, right?
Yeah, right. That's what we've covered so far. And then we'll cover some more.
Yeah,
but
I think
if you get that far, you're not necessarily better off than you were yet, but you're like gathering the materials, you're taking a survey of the land, you're figuring out what's going on, and then you can choose later if you didn't cover it.
Yeah. And David says in the chat that it could work well for school age kids as well. And I believe that there are some schools that are using meditation as a form, like instead of discipline, is that it's about meditation and mindfulness practice. Have you heard about that, Casey?
Yeah. There's a cool collaboration with Hopkins and Baltimore City schools from I think 10 years ago that has a lot of potential. I'd love to see more like university study and schools partner. I don't know where that went now. I bet the faculty who did it moved on or whatever, but
yeah,
I want to see more of it. There's some and it's very effective.
And then how do you recommend people get started with mindfulness meditation?
Yeah, a couple ways. There are apps and there are YouTube channels. They're both pretty good. I like the apps Headspace and Calm a lot. On YouTube, I don't have any particular channel I like, but there's a ton out there. There's a whole bunch. I like Headspace's intro 10 videos that explain what it is and have you practice it. It's a really solid intro. I hope it's still free. It was free a few years ago when I did it. But yeah, apps or YouTube videos. And if you want recommendations from friends, I bet you have some friends who've done these and they'd love to tell you all about it and like commiserate about it, talk about it. Good question. Oh, it looks like the Oculus has one called Trip. I haven't tried it. That sounds cool.
I just tried it. It's pretty great.
All right, next section, processing experiences. I just updated the slides on this section, so if you have feedback for me on them, you feel free to put them in the sidebar chat too. All right, there are these 5 techniques in general for processing experiences: reading, writing, talking to a friend or to a duck, and then in general, expanding your emotional vocabulary. We'll go through each of these. Reading. If you read fiction books, that helps you get a window into another person's mind because the author had to write down their thoughts and feelings into words. It can give you a starting point for how to describe your own thoughts and feelings by reading the characters, and whatever seems relatable or not, you might apply to yourself. So this is like the lowest level, easiest one for anyone to do is to just pick up some fiction. Fiction is like measurably useful. There are some psychology studies on it that reading books with high emotional transportation increase empathy, for example. A lot of people think nonfiction is the only useful category, but fiction is useful in this empathy sort of way. I guess you could also read like real life stories. It doesn't have to be fictional stories, but stories that you relate to for a situation that you're in, and that can be comforting in a way, give you perspective and language and vocabulary. Can be helpful. All right, another one. Number 2 here, writing. If you write down your thoughts and feelings on paper or type them out, or however you feel comfortable doing it, if you just like stream of consciousness, get them out of your head, it gives you a stronger handle on the words you would use to describe them, and it makes them more concrete, more real, more tangible, easier to work with, just by writing them down. You don't even have to read what you write. But if you did read what you wrote, you could also see any patterns in thinking, or you could refine your language by editing things, especially if it's typed, it's easier to edit. So you can get a much stronger handle by editing. By the way, the icon here, you're the robot because you're debugging your brain. There's a human coming up here, which is your friend. If you want to support a friend and help them, one way is just to be present, to be available, even if you're not saying anything to each other. So that's one way to help you process things, is to have a friend around. It can make it easier to bear the burden of dealing with the emotional situation that you're in. Another one is you can talk at a friend, ask them to just listen, and you can just process things as if you were writing it down on paper, but out loud, if that feels more comfortable to you. I had a friend today ask a chat, and he just wanted to talk at me for a while, and that was great. Very easy for me to do. And I was supporting him a lot by letting him vocalize his experience. And another level up from that would be if your friend was reflecting back what you said, like active listening, like saying, oh, it sounds like you feel this way. Just the exact same thing that you're saying. To do even better than that, if your friend helps guess how you might feel in a certain nuanced way. We'll cover the nuance of that in a later section with validation, but a friend can help you refine your vocabulary that you're using and how you're describing the situation, because they internalize it and try to figure it out how they put it into their own words. So anyway, talking with a friend overall is a great way to process your experiences. But you don't always have a friend around, or you're not always ready to talk to a friend, and that's okay too. You can talk to a rubber duck or a cat or a plant, whatever thing you have around that won't really be understanding your words fully. And you can talk at them. A lot like when you're writing and not reading it back, just like saying it out loud can help you process it and put it into words. You can also imagine they're talking back. What are they saying? What would they say back to you? And like simulate a conversation. You could imagine a friend's response. So even if you're not talking to a friend, like what would that person say? Like what would my mother tell me to do in this situation? You can imagine it without talking to them. You can also write to a friend. I end up doing this a lot. I write a Slack message to a coworker saying, this code just won't work and I don't know why. And by the time I write the whole thing, I've already figured it out. It makes sense to me. By the way, that's the source of talking with a duck is rubber duck debugging, which is a common programming technique where you explain a problem to a duck, and then the process of putting it into words helps you figure out the root of the problem. All right, so we covered a whole bunch of different ways. Writing, reading, talking, whether it's one way or they talk back or they process it with you. And they're all options that you can work with for processing experiences. The last section in the processing part here is to expand your emotional vocabulary. So if you're talking to a friend, they might suggest some ways of describing your situation that are different. But if you want to expand your own personal emotional vocabulary you use, it's helpful to have a reference. A lot of people end up just using the headers of this table: angry, sad, anxious, hurt, embarrassed, happy, like very few emotional vocabulary words. But you can learn to use the other ones. You will probably understand all the words on this list, but you probably don't use the full range of emotional vocabulary you understand. There's a whole bunch of references that can help you work on this. This is just one chart. This one is a nice, pretty radial one in circles. This one's actually my favorite. It's like a tree diagram of emotions. So if you zoom into anger, there are the subtypes of anger here that this researcher decided were the subtypes. I can say, all right, I'm not feeling rage. I'm not feeling exasperation. I'm feeling irritable. Yes, I'm grumpy. And then I get a more accurate word from that drilling down. Right. All of these ideas are written down in the concepts in the worksheet, so you can reference them later. I gave you a whole bunch of diagrams here, but like really it's just speaking, reading, writing, and then like to what sources, what like a friend or inanimate object or to nothing, to like a book. Really just like those three. When you're in a stressful situation, it can be hard to think of what approach to use, which of these techniques to apply. And that's how a reference is helpful. If you are in a stressful situation, you can pull up one of these references or make your own and like, which one of these approaches do I want to do? Talk to a friend? Oh, actually, that's a very good idea. I should do that. Or no, I don't want to talk to a friend yet. I should talk to a duck first, or write it out, journaling. Yeah. All right. This one I want to do as an activity where we do it in the sidebar chat here. For your situation that you brainstormed earlier, pick one. And then try to imagine which one of these techniques you did or could have applied to it or would in the future. I'll set a timer for a few minutes. Any questions on the instructions here?
Do you want people to talk in the chat or just think to ourselves?
Yeah, write it in the chat when you're ready.
Cool.
I'll set a timer for 2 minutes. Just pick one.
Just a question in the chat about, yes, to Kate, that you would select which technique you would use for maybe one of the scenarios or experiences you described before about something that made you spiral. And if you do journaling a lot, if you have them from when you were younger, you might be good for that podcast. That's the Mortified Podcast. Have you ever listened to that one? It's people, they have different themes, but sometimes it'll be like young love or something, and it will be people who wrote in their middle school notebooks about a poem about somebody that they were in love with. And it's just really interesting if you've been using journaling for a long time and going back to old journals and seeing what you've written as a different person and what you were obsessed with or spiraling out about at that time. But definitely check out the Mortified Podcast.
All right, that's time. Please share what you have. So it's easier to look back at a past situation and decide what you should have done. Hindsight is 20/20 at all. But how do you get yourself to consider what options to do in the future is the hard part. So however you can get like a reference handy that you can think about, that you can bring up to look at, or form habits of doing some of these more often in general, it's really powerful. All right, any questions on that processing section? Cool. Hopefully it's not too surprising. The hard part is how to think about what to do when, really. Maybe some of the ideas were new to you too, that you might not have considered. That would be cool to learn that. All right, next section. Oh, first, I'd love to do a group photo if you don't mind. I'd love to have whoever's willing, put your camera on and I'll take a photo and put it on Twitter. Hi, friends.
Gonna get our COVID hair together. That's the...
Yeah, right. That was me earlier.
I think you have to stop sharing to get it, but go back to that like gallery view. That, yeah. There you go.
Here we are. Anyone else want to be in the photo? I'm working on it. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Cheese. Got it. Let me paste it. Cool, thank you. I'm so glad I put that in the middle. Sometimes it's at the end and I don't get to it. I don't remember. Good trick. Right, sharing screen. Oh, thanks. I can chat us up again. All right, next section, validation. This is my favorite part. So validation, the goal is to make your friend feel understood. And the opposite goal is to have a friend help you feel understood, but that's less under your control. And that's how I'm introducing it as talking between friends, but you can also self-validate once you get good at the skills. So what does validate mean? It's accepting another person's experience as understandable. Whether or not you agree with them. You don't have to agree with them, but you can say, if I believe X, then Y makes sense. I'm with you. That makes sense, that jump. And in dialectical behavioral therapy, there's this framework, the 6 levels of validation. I find the 6 a little bit hard to remember, all 6 of them, so I broke it down into available and verbalized is half of it, and then it makes sense is another half of it. We'll go through the first half. This framework, the lowest level, be present, is the least validating, but still validating and worth doing. And 6 is the most validating, most powerful, but you can't always do 6. Sometimes you can only do 1. All right, we'll go through each of these. 1 is just to be present. If you are available for a friend and they can talk to you, then it's validating. They can feel your presence. It's comforting. If your friend is just listening, that's even more validating. You can get your words out, say it out loud, just like you were talking to the duck or writing stuff down. Level 2 of the DBT-6 is accurate reflection. So that's saying things back to your friend, like, oh, it sounds like you're feeling the thing they just said. And that can be pretty validating. It shows that you're listening. You're not just sitting there present with them. You're doing more than that. Sometimes your friend might not be ready to share their experiences, and being present is still useful to do with a friend. You don't have to make them talk for them to get this kind of validation out of it. The next level is careful guessing. So that's when your friend is trying to fill in the gaps. So if you're not saying some thoughts and feelings and they're imagining things, they share that with you and you can help say, yes, that's right, or no, that's not right. But this can be tricky. Guessing correctly can be really validating, but guessing incorrectly can be invalidating, like counterproductive, really bad. You don't want to make your friends feel worse by guessing wrong. So for this one, you have to leave room for correction. And I have 2 different tools for that, the open-closed spectrum and the confidence level spectrum. They're kind of similar. Here's an example of how to guess carefully with the open-closed spectrum. Open-ended questions are ones where you don't really suggest the answer to them. It's just very open and they can fill in whatever they want there. Closed, the most closed thing would be just be a statement. And a closed-ended question would be like suggesting, did that feel unfair? Everything in this range is useful. I'm not saying that open-ended is the best always or closed is the best always. It depends on the situation. If you know the situation you're in is unfair and you think so, and you can say that confidently, that's so unfair, I'd feel like that was unfair, then that can be super validating. You can be like, yes, you see and understand my experience. Thank you. But if you guess wrong and it's not unfair and you suggest that, that can be invalidating. You have to correct you. You'd have to say, that's not what I'm feeling. And that can be hard for people. It can take energy, even for people who are good at it, to do that. So if you're less confident, you want to use a more open-ended question. Same idea with the confidence level spectrum. There are words you can insert into your speech like must have or imagine or guess, and they can convey how confident you are in a certain idea. So if you're very confident, you can say, oh, that must have been so unfair. If you don't know, sometimes I say, I can't imagine how you're feeling. I have no idea, because I don't even want to suggest any words. I'm so unconfident. Right, so that's the 2 tools to help you guess carefully at your friend's feelings. The next 3 levels are about saying that makes sense based on certain things. So the lowest one here is to validate someone based on their past. To say, I have an example for this. So I had dogs growing up, and they were very cuddly and kind dogs, but I had a friend who was afraid of them. He wouldn't go near them. He had to put them in the backyard anytime he visited because he was afraid. But it made sense based on his past because he was attacked by a dog as a kid. The next highest level, if we were walking down the street and there was a dog snarling at us from behind a fence, it would make sense he's afraid, not because he was attacked by a dog, although that's true too, but like I'm also afraid. Anyone would be afraid because the dog is snarling at us right now. The dog's territorial. So like it's a little bit stronger to say it's a general human experience than just you because you had that experience before. That's counterintuitive to me. I'm not sure it's true in all situations, but often if it's a general experience, that is more validating than things unique to you. All right, the number 6 here, the highest level of validation from DBT, is called radical genuineness. And this is like saying, me too, I experienced that too. I can imagine what you're feeling and going through. This one only works if they agree that's what they're going through. If they find your experience you're sharing relatable to theirs. You can't impose it on them. Say, I know how you feel. If they don't agree, it doesn't work. Often to do these higher levels of validation, you have to go through the earlier ones first and like reflect accurately and carefully guess at unstated feelings with them and like get on the same page about what the facts are, the thoughts and feelings. And then you can say how it makes sense afterwards. That's the validation part. Okay, so the levels are just being present, accurate reflecting, guessing with them. Or 4, 5, and 6 are you specifically, anyone, or me too. 4, 5, and 6. When talking with a friend through their experience, it's helpful to use these different levels. And I found it useful to refer to this when I was talking to a friend or after talking to a friend to see like which ones did I use, which ones could I use more. And it changed the way I talk to my friends when they need help. Sometimes I realize they only want me to be present, and that's all. That I should feel okay just being present with them if that's what they need. This is a toolkit, and you can use different ones in different contexts with different friends at different times. But now you have exposure to this range of responses you can give to people when you're trying to make them feel understood. Let's do this next section, and then I think we'll have time for one more activity maybe. How long does this usually go, Victoria? I think it's like an hour and a half.
Yeah, our schedule today, the meetup goes through 8 o'clock. So
Good. That's what I thought. Yeah. Perfect. All right, so we might come back to an activity for validation if we get to it, but I want to make sure we get to the content first. So we'll cover cognitive restructuring now. Any questions on validation, the 6 levels?
Do you have tips? Because you mentioned like sometimes friends only need a certain level of validation, but how do you like check in with them to see like, hey, what do you really want from me in terms of the validation here?
I love that question. Sometimes I literally ask questions. I ask friends, do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to help you fill in the gaps and guess with you and explore and say words? Do you want me to help say that how that makes sense to me? Like I'll literally ask them like this list. There are shorter versions of the list. Like, do you want me to just listen or not? That's a big one. Sometimes they just want to talk to you, like talking to a duck. They just want to get their words out of the air, and that's great. That's powerful. And that's all you have to do. It's easier for you as a friend to just listen. Sometimes they do want more. Often they go through the stages. They want to say everything out loud first, and then they want you to understand it with them. You can ask questions. At some point, you can ask questions, clarify things, and then they want to talk about the validation part and brainstorm solutions. It's often a process. Sometimes you only do one segment of the process and you're talking to a friend in one session talking to them. That's normal too. There's a great cartoon I always think of, which I can't draw on the air, which is basically like, I want to do A and then B and then C and then D, and it was this basically in cartoon form. Good question.
Yeah. And then Brandon asked, so how do you do validation with the duck or meditation or validation? How does this validation back to yourself?
Yeah, self-validation is a little more tricky than validating a friend. It's like harder for you to come up with the words. Often, I've definitely found it true for myself. I have a much easier time validating a friend than myself. But the same patterns apply. Like, it makes sense I would feel this way. First of all, because I do, and it's a fact that it's just a data input that I had that automatic feeling. But second of all, it's like makes sense in a predictable sort of way because I had this experience before, which stressed me out. Or anyone in this situation, like not getting called back for an interview or for a job you were excited for. Anyone will be upset about that. That makes sense. So like you can self-validate and say that makes sense because, and it feels true and you feel confident in it, that can give you the same kind of sense that talking to a friend for validation would. Talking to the duck or meditation though, I guess just if you say it out loud and you say it makes sense to the duck and the duck doesn't disagree with you, that's pretty good too.
I think there's a NPR podcast. I think they did a study where you did VR and you would like do therapy and you would talk to like Sigmund Freud and then everything would go black. And then when you came back on, you'd be looking at a picture of yourself and saying the things that you had just said to yourself. It's just like a really interesting, and it works. Like you actually end up like you're able to kind of validate and talk through your own issues.
Yeah, I love that. Another trick I've heard, I haven't tried this myself, but it sounds great, is imagine someone is exactly like you in every way except they're not you. Maybe give them another name. What would you tell them if they're a different person? That could be easier also. Just like any way to separate it to make it external and you're probably more skilled at that than yourself. It's harder for yourself. But you can learn to do it, and practicing on friends, practicing yourself will develop the skill in you.
So, okay.
Yeah,
I thought you'd already covered cognitive restructuring, and I thought, oh my gosh, is this kind of like he's telling us now to draw the rest of the owl? But this is the next segment. Okay.
Yeah, next section. Right, so cognitive restructuring is the process of identifying cognitive distortions, which are like code smells, like bugs in the code, and then changing them to be a more adaptive form, like a refactored code that's easier to read and work with, less buggy. This is an image of 10 of the most common ones that I like a lot. It has images to make them a little more memorable. And we'll go through some examples, and I'll pick out which ones of these apply to those examples. So for the story where I was going to a meetup and I was hangry, wet, and late, I stepped in a puddle, I thought to myself, wet shoes are the worst. And then I went, whoop! I thought about it. I heard this automatic thought. I took stock in it. And I determined that it had this cognitive distortion, this distortion of reality, this thought pattern called magnification. I was magnifying the problem. They're not the worst. There are things that are worse in a literal sense. And it wasn't very satisfying to call it out, but it stopped me from downward spiraling more, which was my goal. That was great. If I'm late, I shouldn't even go. I heard that on my thought too, and I went, whoop. That sounds like all or nothing thinking. Going or not going, it's like binary, black and white. There is a gray area, and it might be fine. I should think about it. And then the last one, today sucks. Whew, this has a lot of them. I was overgeneralizing the entire day, that everything before and everything after sucked. I was disqualifying all the positive stuff that happened earlier in the day. Like maybe I had a very nice latte and I got a lot of work done. Nope, that doesn't matter. I'm in a negative state right now, sounds like. And fortune telling the rest of the day will also be bad because in this moment, I'm in a negative state. So I realized that those three cognitive distortions were happening when I had that thought. So I had some thoughts on the left, the three I just said out loud, and then instead I thought, counter thoughts. I am feeling frustrated. I told myself, it's okay to go late. People do it all the time. I also told myself today can get better. It probably will get better. This resource is so helpful. I recommend you print it. Link to from the resources a couple places. Like maybe print it out or put it on your desktop, have it handy. You could also bookmark the Wikipedia article for cognitive distortions, and that has a whole bunch of these. And just like read it once in a while and see if you notice yourself thinking these. It happens all the time. Okay, there's an activity there we could do. I'll give you an overview and I want you to help me pick which activity. We don't have time for both, probably. Yeah, I'm glad you're saving the side chat. That's really good. There's so many good links there. All right, I'll give you a quick overview and then we'll go back to the discussion and do a breakout room in one of them. So there are resources on debuggingyourbrain.com. These handouts you can get. If you go to the website, this is what they look like. They're just links to Google Docs. You can make a copy of them if you'd like. If you want updates, like when my board game comes out or when I have new resources that I share, you can sign up for that on the website too. All right, some content we covered includes going whoop, prompting yourself to become introspective. These 4 input categories you can use to explore what's causing you to feel this way and what your immediate reactions are. 6 processing techniques, which we went through with, I had updated diagrams. Talking to friends, talking to duck, writing, reading, and expanding emotional vocabulary. We went through the validation levels, how to support a friend and make them feel understood. And we covered some of the most common maladaptive thought patterns. So that's the process from left to right across the board game board, how to process your stressful experiences. There are some other tools I feel like we're ending, but I'm going to have us do a breakout on, I think, probably validation when we're done. I just want to do the conclusion first. For other tools, you can try to see a therapist. There's even teletherapy, like online therapy that you could try if you're interested. You could consider the book that popularized CBT, Feeling Good. There's the app Calm and the app Headspace that help with mindfulness meditation in particular. If social anxiety sounds something relatable to you, you can go to Enjoyable and take their survey to see if their app would help you. It's like a CBT app which gives you prompts and exercises, a lot like what I did in this talk, but specifically for social anxiety issues. I wish there were one for not social anxiety, a CBT general app, but I haven't found one. There is none yet, which is also why I'm giving these talks to fill in the gap. Of course, you can find my book as a print book, eBook, or audiobook, which has what we covered here and more. If you think your coworkers would enjoy this talk, I'm happy to give this talk at workplaces. I also have a talk on practical psychological safety and team health, how to make your team happy and more productive using applied psychology. And I have a third one on happy, healthy, productive remote teams. I worked remote for 5 years, and I've seen a lot of patterns and anti-patterns for how to get remote to work well. Even a year into the pandemic, a lot of companies aren't doing even half of the best practices from jobs that I've been to, but you could. A lot of these are just ideas you might not have been exposed to before. And lastly, I'm happy to do individual coaching. If you want help in the tech field in general, or applying to jobs, career stuff, or applying this concept from this book to yourself. I'm not a therapist, but I can be like a coach and talk to you about stuff anyway. If you want to keep in touch, here's my email. Feel free to put that in the sidebar for me. I'm on DC Tech Slack all the time. You can always chat me there. And I'm pretty responsive on Twitter and LinkedIn too. So, thank you, thank you. All right, any questions overall?
No, I think this was really great. Thank you so much, Casey. It's a great talk.
Yeah, thank you.